This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On April the 30th, we hosted our annual Defense and Security Studies Conference on Threats to Global Security under Trump 2.0, featuring expert speakers on Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and managing Canada-US relations in the second Trump era. For reasons of security, our speaker on Iran was not recorded for this series.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. The first task I have this morning is to ask our esteemed President, Bill Hines, to come forward and offer his greetings to you. Come on up, Bill.
I get the fun part of the morning here, which takes about 3 minutes, I'm glad to say. Distinguished speakers, members and guests of the Royal Canadian Military Institute, I'm very privileged to welcome all of you to this important conference on threats to global security, and Dan has added under Trump 2.0. Heaven forfend there's a Trump 3.0 or 4.0 in future, but we'll find out in due course. You honor us with your presence, and you once again demonstrate that, as it has for the past 135 years, the RCMI has an ongoing voice in discussions affecting Canada's role in military and strategic policy and in international affairs. Now, when Dr. Dan Eustache, Director, RCMI Defense and Security Studies Program, began to design the format of this annual conference, I doubt that he could have anticipated the full extent of the changes in our national and international forums that would take place in just a few months. Dan and our distinguished speakers will place a number of related events in context for us and will remind us of the threats to our global security that await Canada in so many corners of the world. It's not enough that we must face an aberrant and unstable US president who would challenge us and make us an economic vassal after 80 years of close military and strategic cooperation. We must do so with a new minority government which faces challenges on a host of strategic fronts, national as well as international. The goodwill of all Canadians will carry us forward as we strive for success, but we must maintain our support in the face of opposition from both traditional enemies and a US government which refers to us as the 51st state, despite our decades of sovereignty. Our speakers today will help us understand what we are up against. Education, in terms of Canada's global interests, is power, and we need power to deal with those around us who would seek to diminish us in international councils or to exploit us to their own advantage. Now, we are indebted to Dan and his team for the hard work involved in bringing us together today, and we look forward to the presentations that we are about to experience. Dan, thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to ask Nicole Sicon from my committee to come forward and introduce our first speaker, which is Marcus Kolga, who will be talking to us about Russia. Thank you. Thanks, Nicole.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you've been looking forward to this conference as much as I have. I know that I'm thrilled to hear all these engaging presentations today on topics that we are all seeing shape the international landscape and our own country right here. So in light of that, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Marcus Kolga. He was an expert on foreign disinformation and influence operations, and he's extensively written on Russian and European issues, which he'll be speaking to us today. He's renowned for his founding of disinfowatch.org, an organization analyzing foreign disinformation, and he's been sanctioned by both Russia and China for all his work in promoting democracy and blocking disinformation. Today's presentation is titled The Disinformation Doctrine, outlining strategic Russian operations to undermine their adversaries, including direct threats to Canadian sovereignty. And the question of this is, how are we to challenge these growing influence operations, especially in the face of declining American protection? If you're as interested as I am, please join me in welcoming Mr. Kolga to the stage.
I should mention that I'm one of 3 Canadians who have been sanctioned both by Russia and China. And the gentleman exiting the door there is one of the other 3. So the 2 of us, you have 2 double-sanctioned Canadians here with you today. So just give me 2 seconds. My computer seems to have randomly restarted on me, which is always a problem. And a concern when you're on both China's and Russia's sanctions list, because you just never know what sort of things they might be up to. Just bear with me. Okay, sorry about this. It is a real concern when you are on both the sanctions list, because they do tend to put spyware and such onto activist computers, so bear with me. Again, thanks Dan and to RCMI for inviting me here today. So let me begin by outlining Russia's core geopolitical objectives over the past 2 decades under Vladimir Putin's rule. Now, at the very top of that list has always been and remains the consolidation of power and the enrichment of Russia's security services and kleptocrats to sustain and secure Putin's personal grip on the state. Everything Vladimir Putin says and does must be understood through this lens. Already in 1999, a year before Boris Yeltsin officially handed him power, Putin was already using information operations to boost his profile and image. And so from an obscure municipal bureaucrat in St. Petersburg and a former KGB agent, he reinvented himself as a so-called strongman willing to sacrifice everything to protect Russia. The projection of strength and the constant portrayal of Russia as under siege by external enemies has been a central tool of Kremlin propaganda ever since. And when conflict hasn't existed naturally, Putin has simply manufactured it to feed the narrative. Whether it's the United States, NATO, democratic movements in neighboring states, or even the existence of a strong LGBTQ community within Russia, no opportunity has been missed to invent new enemies, stoke fear, and cultivate a culture of paranoia. And this internal narrative has always had an external target, and that's both Ukraine and the West. Information warfare has become as a potent weapon for the Kremlin as any tank or missile. It's a critical tool for achieving Putin's secondary but essential goals, and that's the delegitimization of Ukraine and eroding Western support for it, undermining Western democracy, fracturing unity within NATO, and asserting strategic dominance over the Western world, including here in Canada. As much as we may prefer to ignore it, Russia has grown into a direct threat to our democracy, our alliances, and even our sovereignty. And over the past decade, that threat has evolved, it's adapted, and it's intensified. Meanwhile, Canadians have largely ignored Russia's imperialism and militarization in the Arctic, even though it's been happening in plain sight over the past 2 decades. During this period, we also saw something deeply concerning, the growing alignment of Donald Trump's objectives with those of Vladimir Putin. At the 2018 Helsinki summit, Trump even appeared open to Putin's outrageous suggestion that the United States extradite Bill Browder, the leader of the global Magnitsky campaign and my good friend, to Russia. Now, over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk through some of the threats that directly affect Canada, our allies, and our national interests. One of the most immediate and persistent threats is information and influence operations. It's a threat that we can no longer afford to downplay, and one that was made crystal clear last year with the exposure of the Tenant media case. Now, in September of last year, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed an indictment targeting 2 employees of Russian state media outlet RT. They were accused of working with 2 far-right Canadian influencers to set up an online platform called Tenant Media. According to the indictment, Tenant was created to serve as a conduit for Kremlin influence operations in North America, a way to reach far-right audiences in the United States and Canada through a network of well-known online influencers, including at least one Canadian. It was allegedly financed by Russia, and content creation was also controlled by RT. The job of these influencers that were employed by Tenet Media, some of whom were paid as much as $100,000 per podcast episode, was to flood the US and Canadian social media with content that aligned with the Kremlin, including the erosion of trust in our democratic institutions. This information was also used to try and undermine support for Ukraine, as we'll see shortly in this example. This was not a small or fringe operation. It reached hundreds of thousands of Canadians, especially younger audiences, planting seeds of doubt, division, and despair. Their YouTube channel reached 14 million viewers across North America. Now, the Tenet Media case proves that Russia is no longer relying solely on state media channels like RT or Sputnik, and that they're laundering their narratives through proxies, influencers, and covert networks designed to look Canadian, sound Canadian, and to influence Canadians. This is strategic, it is systematic, and it is a direct attack on the sovereignty of our information environment and our cognitive sovereignty. Let's listen to one of these Tenet Media podcasts, a short clip here.
But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
So that's the kind of content that was being funded by RT, and it was viewed by millions of Americans and Canadians. Now, the success of a Russian information operation isn't just measured by clicks or views. It's measured by its real world impact, how it shapes policy decisions and provokes political action. And we've seen that impact quite clearly. Last year, illiberal populist Republican lawmakers in the US delayed critical weapons and aid to Ukraine. Some, like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, even echoed Russian propaganda almost word for word to justify their obstruction. And it's not just happening in the US. Here in Canada, on the far right, on this slide, no pun intended, we see People's Party leader Maxime Bernier tweet out a laundry list of Kremlin talking points, all designed to erode Canadian support for Ukraine and aligned with Russia's strategic interests. Now, if delaying U.S. aid and weapons to Ukraine was a tactical win for Russian information influence operations, then the public statements and positions taken by Donald Trump amount to a historic victory for the Kremlin. Take a look at these examples. On the left, we see original Russian disinformation, and on the right, Trump echoing, amplifying, and in some case, going even further with these narratives. He's accused President Zelensky of being a dictator, a falsehood straight out of the Kremlin playbook. In fact, Trump takes it a step further, suggesting that Zelensky, not Putin, is somehow responsible for the war. This is a severe inversion of reality and a gift to Russian propaganda. What's even more alarming is how this disinformation spillover has begun to infect Trump's rhetoric in Canada. He's dismissed Canada's sovereignty, our culture, our history, referring to us, of course, as the 51st state. He's described the border between our two countries as being arbitrary. It's rhetoric that mirrors Vladimir Putin's own rejection of Ukraine's identity and sovereignty. Now, this growing alignment between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin represents an immediate and serious threat to Canada and our allies. Even during his first term, Trump's hostility towards NATO directly aligned with the Kremlin's top objective, to weaken and divide the alliance. You can see an example of that on the right here, on the left rather. It's an almost oxymoronic statement that perfectly mirrors Moscow's narrative, and it's only gotten worse. In recent months, Trump has demonstrated a clear willingness to reward Vladimir Putin for his brutal war against Ukraine and for the unspeakable crimes committed against the Ukrainian people. He's openly floated giving Putin exactly what he wants: territorial concessions and a rejection of Ukraine's right to join NATO. This, of course, has raised serious concerns amongst NATO members along the alliance's eastern flank. But today, Finland, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are all pulling out of the Ottawa Landmines Treaty, and they're doing it for one reason: the growing threat of a potential future Russian invasion. Take a look at the satellite image here on the right. It shows the rapid expansion of Russia's Kamenka military base near the Finnish border. Over the past 2 years, new rail lines have been built. Old ones have been upgraded to allow Russian mechanized forces to quickly move across the border if needed. This is a deep and growing concern in every one of those capitals, and the surge in Russian military activity on their eastern borders. At the same time, enlistment in the Russian army is rising quite quickly. Thanks to a big increase in pay and benefits, about 30,000 Russians are signing up every month. And there's another serious risk on the horizon. If a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine is forced, or even just agreed to, it could give Putin exactly what he needs: the time and space to reconstitute his forces and prepare for an invasion of one or several of these NATO nations. The threat is real enough that Lithuania has already released evacuation plans for its capital city, Vilnius, and they did that just last week. In all of this, every single development carries serious implications for NATO, of course, and Canada as well. We're also seeing escalating evidence of Russian sabotage operations targeting NATO member states, including Canada. Late last year, authorities uncovered a Russian plot to place incendiary devices on cargo jets flying from Europe to Canada. The operation was quietly disrupted, but it received almost no public attention. Meanwhile, underseas cables have been severed in the Baltic Sea, and similar unsolved incidents have occurred right here in Canada. In our own territorial waters, critical cables connecting Newfoundland and Nova Scotia have been cut, raising serious concerns about potential hybrid sabotage. Russia is also continuing to target Canada through espionage and covert influence operations. Its intelligence agencies are actively identifying and recruiting assets for information warfare and disinformation campaigns. One example is Mikhail Mikushin, a senior GRU colonel and Russian military intelligence officer. He spent more than a decade living undercover in Canada. He earned a BA from Carleton University, a master's from the University of Calgary, and he volunteered on a federal election campaign and even wrote for a Canadian naval journal. He was one of the Russian operatives swapped for political prisoners last summer, and his case should be a wake-up call for all Canadian security services. Now, the photo on the right shows an alleged Russian agent named Noma Zarubina. She posed as a Russian opposition activist to infiltrate democratic events, pro-democracy Russian events, including a recent conference on the decolonization of Russia, which I also attended as a panelist last December. Now, Russia's own Arctic Strategy 2035 spells out its intent in the Arctic. It is preparing for a conflict in the Arctic, and its intentions couldn't be more clear. Moscow sees the Arctic not as a region for peaceful cooperation anymore, but as a resource frontier to dominate. In 2007, a Russian submarine planted a flag on the seabed underneath the North Pole. It was a symbolic act, but the message was explicit: the Arctic is Russian. And in 2021, Russia escalated that claim, formally asserting ownership over all resources underneath the Arctic Sea, right up to the edge of Canada's 200-mile economic exclusive zone. This is fully consistent with Russia's current Arctic strategy, which calls for aggressive expansion and militarized control of Arctic resources. Since then, we've watched Russia rapidly militarize the region. Over 24 Arctic military bases have been either built or refurbished. They've developed nuclear power systems small nuclear power systems to sustain them, and new strategic weapons to defend them. Among those weapons is the Poseidon long-range nuclear-powered underwater torpedo, which carries with it a 100 megaton warhead. This is designed to irradiate entire coastlines. This isn't about deterrence, it's about security and holding territory and resources Russia now claims as its own. And all of this, of course, is quite close to home. For instance, Russia's Nagorskoye Air Base, northeast of Svalbard, is as close to Ellesmere Island as Ottawa is to Winnipeg. So finally, the Kremlin's rhetoric is, of course, growing more aggressive, and it now mirrors Russia's expanding military posture in the Arctic. In February, Russia's ambassador to Canada, Oleg Stepanov, gave an interview to TASS, one that was widely amplified by Kremlin-controlled media. In that interview, he claimed that Canada is militarizing the Arctic, not Russia. He even implied that Canada, alongside our NATO allies, Sweden and Finland, is provoking a confrontation with Moscow. This is a familiar tactic. It's the same brand of disinformation and blame shifting the Kremlin used to justify its invasion of Ukraine, first in 2014 and then again in 2022. And we need to take this seriously. We have to act. The promises made during the last election to strengthen our Arctic defenses can't be delayed or buried in bureaucracy. And we need to move, and we need to move now. That means investing in icebreakers, submarines, drones, Arctic deep water ports to secure our sovereignty and deter future aggression. Because if there's one thing we've learned about Vladimir Putin, it's that he does follow through on his threats, even if it costs tens of thousands of lives, even if it cripples his own economy. So the threat from Russia is rising. Our sovereignty across multiple domains is at growing risk, and unfortunately, we can no longer rely exclusively on the United States to shield us from them. And so on that cheery note, I will leave it there. I apologize again for the delay in the beginning, and I look forward to your questions.
Good morning. I have a question with regards to Trump and Putin. Oh, I like to call him Putin because I'm French.
Yum.
Is he getting closer to Putin because he likes the dictatorship style, the strong leader style, or do they have something on him?
Well, I don't know if they have something on them. I think there's all sorts of speculation about that there might be some sort of compromise tied to Trump's real estate in New York and Florida. I don't know whether that's 100% true. I suspect that when Donald Trump looks at Vladimir Putin, he sees someone he admires. I think Donald Trump aspires to be a leader like Vladimir Putin, to hold on to power as long as Vladimir Putin has. I mean, let's not forget, Vladimir Putin has been in power now for 25 years. There have been elections, they're all sham elections, they've all been fixed. And so I think when Donald Trump looks to Vladimir Putin, he sees someone who he wants to be like. We know that Donald Trump also wants to do away with term limits. It sounds like he is planning on running for a third term, despite what the Constitution says. So I suspect it's vanity, and again, an aspiration to become an authoritarian leader. I think that's where that relationship is, what that's founded in.
I just wanted to ask you about Ed Martin, who's Trump's pick to be Washington, D.C. District Attorney, and he's appeared on RT more than 150 times.
Sure has.
Is he an example of sort of Russian influence and Russian?
Thank you for bringing up that point. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is a clear example of how RT has influenced U.S. politics. When you have, and he's not the only one. I mean, there have been a number of Trump cabinet members, Trump allies who have appeared on RT. Tulsi Gabbard is one of those, the director of Trump's intelligence. Where that influence is coming from, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, when you have these individuals openly, freely appearing on RT, that's problematic. The question is, did they know what they were doing when they were appearing on RT? I mean, RT has been identified by both the Global Affairs and the State Department as a key component of Russia's intelligence operations. Did these individuals know that when they were coming on, or were they just basically exploiting that their appearances on RT for partisan political purposes? It's unknown. But what is problematic is that when you have these key individuals, and we have Canadians as well who have appeared on RT, we have Canadians who continue to appear on RT today. The problem with that is that when they do appear on RT, they legitimize RT as a platform. They lend their own credibility to it. And that becomes problematic in the networks that these individuals operate. And it basically helps Russia to weaponize information through those platforms, unfortunately. But the fact that someone who has appeared on RT that many times is being considered to be the Attorney General of the United States is deeply concerning.
One more question. Please.
One more question. We've got a hard stop at 11:40.
Yeah. My question relates to how much actual capacity does Russia have going forward? Like, they've suffered so much in the way of losses in Ukraine and troops and materiel and people, and then your presentation talks about their plans to further expand into the Arctic and threats there. And I'm sitting here saying, how much resources do they have to expend on these further expansionary adventures that you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the latest numbers are that Russia has lost 12,000 armored vehicles in its in its war with Ukraine, 300 jets. There are 300,000 casualties, 100,000 dead. So yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. How are they going to do this? My understanding there was a very good article that was published in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week that basically said, I mean, look, Russia is on a full wartime economy right now. It is producing these weapons at a significant rate. All of the newer technology, all the newer tanks, all the newer weaponry that they do have is apparently being held back in reserves. They're using all of their old technology, older tanks, on the front lines right now with Ukraine. And there's real concern. I mentioned Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania earlier. There's real concern that those weapons, those modern weapons, are being now shifted to these new bases that are being built alongside the Baltic and Finnish borders. So there is capacity there. Their recruitment is ramping up. They are offering much better pay to to those who will enlist. The benefits have increased. So the army is almost being seen domestically amongst Russians as a sort of an elite profession at this point. So there is considerable capacity in terms of their ability to fight. Certainly in the Arctic, all of that infrastructure has already been built in place. It's been there for the past at least a decade. In terms of information warfare, Russia is spending $1.6 billion annually on those operations. So there's lots of money. All of that is being geared to targeting us and to ramp up its war-making capabilities, unfortunately. Okay, thank you. Right on time, 11:40.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.